Welcome to the Via Learning Series, presented by Haney. During this webcast, we'll explore the sustainable reality, how packaging possibilities tackle consumer demands, with presentations from Meghann Jones of Ipsos, Craig Robinson of PTI, and Ralph Giammarco of S-OneLP Labels and Packaging. Up first, we hear from Meghann Jones, Senior Vice President of Corporate Sustainability at Ipsos. Meghann brings insights into consumer beliefs and behavior when it comes to sustainable packaging and the risks and opportunities for businesses.
So we're living in what Ipsos calls the age of uncertainty. The age of uncertainty is characterized by concern about social and economic threats, such as jobs, inequality and crime, and existential threats, such as climate change. There is political polarization and activism, amplified and empowered by technology and social media, and we seem to be having a rethink around how important institutions like business engages with society. This data from our 28-country public opinion tracker tells us that the vast majority of people believe that we must change our habits if we're going to avoid environmental disaster. Waste and packaging are the most concerning areas after climate change and pollution. And just since last year, there's been a significant increase in concern. So these issues are becoming more salient for people. As consumers, people tell us that they feel better about brands that act to protect and restore the environment. There is evidence that consumers reward brands that take initiative. This is the Starbucks announcement that they'll eliminate plastic straws by next year. After this announcement, around 1/3 of people were more favourable towards the brand, and this number's much higher, as you can see here, among younger people. So, who do consumers expect will lead on resolving these challenges, and given the discussion today, the challenge of waste and packaging in particular? For most sustainability issues, people have a very limited sense of individual responsibility. But actually, when it comes to sustainable packaging, there is quite a strong sense of collective responsibility. Producers, the government, consumers, retailers all need to play a part. What happens to products post-use seems to be where consumers are most engaged. They're most willing to recycle and to reuse. This makes sense. It's where consumers experience the greatest sense of agency. When it's just them and the empty packet, they start to feel some responsibility towards what happens next. It becomes their problem that they have ownership of. So now is a good time to think about knowledge. The consumers at the store facing the shelf of products, or they're in their kitchen with the empty carton in their hand. Do they have the information that they need to make a sustainable choice or choose the sustainable action? People actually have a lot of trust in sustainability claims on labels. Here we're seeing people who think that products with these claims are better than products without these claims. Even the very vague at best and meaningless at worst green is trusted by 2/3 of people. It's not hard to believe that people have a problem with understanding when we know that this is just a fraction of what they're faced with for every single one of the thousands of products that they buy each year. We ran a question recently about trust in the process and found that while only half say they trust the recycling process in their local area, 2/3 are pretty optimistic that the items they put in the recycling are eventually reused in some way. So the news that this is not the case doesn't seem to have had a devastating impact on people's trust in the system. Packaging is necessary, and consumers recognise its value. Most importantly, packaging helps food to stay fresh. If food goes to waste, that's a major sustainability issue in itself, as you all know. Consumers appreciate that. This isn't as simple as all packaging is bad, which means that there are 4 points at which packaging communicates with the consumer about the attributes of the product, which means that there are 4 opportunities for packaging to help consumers live their sustainability aspirations. In thinking about consumers at their moment of truth, how can they be nudged into more sustainable behaviour? People are willing to take some of the responsibility, and to participate in the solution, but they want to be led, and they'll hold the producer responsible for the outcome regardless of whether they participated or not. So at the key moments of truth, they need the producer to help them make the right choice obvious and to make the right choice easy. To finish, I wanted to share a recent example of consumer engagement on the issue of packaging and recycling. It's another Coke example. This is Coke's Open Taste Recycle campaign. I think this particular image is from the UK. It's authentic and true to Coke's existing promise. It's newsworthy and shareable, which opens up the possibility for both raising awareness and creating positive social reinforcement for users. It's intuitive, it's obvious what to do. It invites consumer participation in the solution, which makes them feel good. It's educational, it helps to close the knowledge gap, it tells you that it's the most sustainable option, and it tells you exactly what to do with it when you're finished with it. And finally, it's highly functional. It's easy to comply because the recycling bin is right there.
Thanks, Meghann. Up next, we have Craig Robinson, Global Vice President of Business Development and Innovation at PTI. Craig looks at how we can unlock the challenges facing the future of sustainability.
So this slide is of resins, both clear and colored, and it represents the entirety of just the 2025 commitments from 3 brands, Pepsi, Coke, and Nestle Waters. They've each got commitments to have, not 100% even, 25, 50% content in their bottles by the year 2025. So as of right now, less than 7% of that capacity is in the pipe stream. So that means that there's a 93% shortage in the year 2019 to the commitment to just those 3 are making for 2025. Okay, but this is a flow chart of where we are with PET bottles. These are millions of pounds. So there's about 6 million pounds of PET going into bottles just in the United States. So there's a whole flow in and out. You've got imports, exports. We're actually bringing PET into the United States. We're even rPET in, flake in. So that black number up there on the top right, that's actually what's disposed of. That ends up in landfill or it's incinerated. It really, in the United States, all starts with collection. So right now in the United States, only 26% of glass is actually collected. Now everybody thinks the glass is being recycled, and in a minute I'll show you why that's actually a problem sort of theory. In most municipalities now, even if you have curbside collection, glass is not being collected. Here in Cincinnati it is, but most of that glass is actually ending up ground up, and it ends up in the top layer of the landfill. So it's part of the substrate that goes over the landfill itself, gravel, dirt, and so on. 29% of PET, this is just PET in particular. So 29% of PET in the United States is collected. Not all of that's ending back up in bottles. Now PET is one of the few plastics that can actually be completely recycled back into a bottle. So if you give me a 12-pack of water bottles, we put it through a recycling facility, we end up with almost 12 bottles at the end. So there's not a lot of loss. 50% of aluminum cans are collected in the United States. Now when you look at the rest of the world, Meghann showed some collection rates around the rest of the world. 50% is pathetic. Pathetic. 29% is embarrassing. So we had a team in from Japan recently, and we just kind of asked them, well, what's your recycle rate of PET in Japan? And their recycle rate's somewhere around 98%. So aluminum has a value by the ton, right? So aluminum is worth a little over $1,300 a ton. Unrecycled PET, pre-recycling, is somewhere around $300 a ton. Glass is actually a negative number. So glass is so cumbersome to deal with that it's actually got a negative value in terms of recycling. There has to be a little bit when they make glass of recycle, but to pulverize it, they're competing against silicon. With aluminum, they're competing against raw aluminum, so recycled aluminum financially actually makes a lot of sense. PET, depending on where oil is, the base ingredient for most plastics is petroleum. So if barrels of oil are low, plastics are low. If they're high, then the recycled plastics start to make a lot more sense because they have more of a fixed value. This is actually from Coca-Cola South Pacific. This is from Australia. And this is something that we could never, ever do in the United States. We can do it in the UK, we can do it in Germany, we can do it in Japan, we can do it almost anywhere else in the world, but we can't do this. This is every bottle under 600 milliliters, it's about 20 ounces. Right now, there are two different kinds of recycling of plastics in the United States. One is mechanical, the other is chemical. The word chemicals, for some of our clients in the CPG world, chemical recycling is a little bit problematic. They want to use some other term, so the actual term is depolymerization. Let that roll off your tongue. We're taking the polymers and separating them, then rejoining them, and you're going to basically end up with a new plastic. Now, horizontally, depolymerization is not a commercial thing right now. So we're testing right now dozens and dozens of lab-produced PET. Now it is rPET. So right now we're working with a couple of clients on pilot plants and commercial plants. And the cool thing about the chemical recycling is we can take the carpet, we can take the clothing, we can take the fiber, we can take the bottles, we can take the jars, we can take whatever, and put it in an accelerator, put it in a reactor, and basically out-poops PET. That PET right now does not fit into the FDA's rules for recycling. Chemically, it's basically virgin PET, because again, we've stripped everything off, we've reconstituted it, and now it's actually a PET molecule. Unfortunately, that doesn't really fit what the FDA rules are for what they call a letter of non-objection. So for a material to be put into the food stream, it has to go through a lot of research, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, and you end up with a letter of non-objection. So the FDA is going to say, it's okay. They're just going to say, we can't figure a reason not to do this, so go ahead. But the chemical recycling, I personally think, is going to be kind of a game changer, because we can take all the materials that had to be either incinerated or had to be put in a landfill, we can actually turn them back into packaging. So what is the mitigator in Australia and Europe and the rest of the world? Well, the mitigator for recycling of PET is actually deposits. So right now there are 10 states in the United States that have deposits on PET bottles. And it's an interesting statistic in those states. So you have 10 states, their recycling rate is 65 to 95%. The rest of the country, do the math on this, that means the rest of the country is actually about 20%. So if we're at 29%, these people are 41% of everything that's collected in the United States. And that difference is deposits. So again, those 10 states, and the only big population states are actually New York and California, are 41% of everything that's collected. So if we go back to that illustration where you had the glass, the aluminum, and the PET, if there was a national deposit on PET bottles, then the number would probably be somewhere around 80 to 85%, and 50%, and 26%. And the monetization of that collection then becomes really the difference. We have to come up with a way of understanding that the deposit really is, I think, the only, for me anyways, looking at this, the only solution. So if we can get the deposits around the rest of the country, a lot of what we're worrying about as it relates to PET disappears.
Thanks, Craig. Finally, we hear from Ralph Giammarco, Vice President of S-One Labels and Packaging, to discuss the opportunities with flexible packaging as a path to meeting sustainability goals.
So a really cool thing happened last month. half of our team was in Brussels at a trade show called Label Expo, and the other half was at Pack Expo out in Las Vegas. And for the first time ever, the theme everywhere at both of those shows was sustainability. And in 12 months, that changed tremendously. There was far less of it last year. I mean, you heard things about, the paper industry and trying to be a little bit more environmentally conscious and all that stuff, but it was mostly marketing, it was mostly lip service. This time you actually saw technology occur. You saw meetings going on, collaborating going on. So it was a major change for us. But all of that is from the manufacturing standpoint. You're going to hear more of it from the manufacturing standpoint from me. But the real key to this whole thing is with you. It really is design. It starts there. And if we're going to change this thing, it becomes something critical that it starts with design. I'm asking the people in this room, how do we provide the motivation to act? Instead of saying, we know where people are today. We know they're not motivated to do what we need them to do. So that's okay. Those are the numbers you saw. But what can we do to make that change? So what is it that we can do in this space that's going to motivate people to move towards it? Let's talk about where we are today. So to create supply, you need to create demand. And there's a paradox here. And I'm kind of a paradox guy, right? So for me, paradox is if you want change, you have to keep some things the same. So in this particular case, we're talking about moving forward with a sustainable solution. We've got to make sure that we go back to the packaging basics first. Let's start with the fact that when you're talking about sustainable packaging, flexible packaging by definition has some sustainability to it. So we're already talking about transportation benefits compared to glass or cans. There's numbers like 26 trucks versus 1 truck with flexible packaging. Because you've got shelf life extension. So all of a sudden, in a world where we're doing more e-commerce, you guys know that the flexible packaging allows us to do more things, to sell more food, keep it on the shelf longer. Lightweight, source reduction, all those things are key aspects to it, and the product to package ratio. So by definition, flexible packaging already is bringing some things to the whole concern about the environment and concern about resources. But when you get down to flexible packaging, hard to really understand where the definition lies. So one of them, for instance, is biodegradable. An anaerobic or an aerobic process where microorganisms break down something and it goes into water or it goes into biomass or it goes into methane. That's what biodegradable is. So basically, every single thing is biodegradable because everything degrades. So it's only relative, the phrase biodegradable is only relative if there's an environment that you're describing. So when people use biodegradable, it doesn't mean anything right in this space, the packaging space. And it has to have a context. It's got to have an environment that we're talking about and a time frame. When you start to do that, then you start to talk about things like compostable. But biodegradable by itself, it's kind of a greenwashing that phrase. It doesn't really mean anything. Oxo-degradable is another phrase that you'll hear, where people are trying to mention the fact that, well, this is oxo-degradable. What oxo-degradable is it's talking about taking plastics. So I told you I've been doing a lot with plastics over the years, and polyethylene being a big one in packaging. The idea is to take a long chain, molecular chain, and shorten it. And when you do that, it becomes brittle, and it breaks up in little pieces. Okay, so think about that for a minute. From a sustainable standpoint or from an environmental standpoint, not a great thing. Because those little pieces, if they get into the recycled stream, they're infecting the virgin or the polymers that are in that, so it makes it less likely to recycle. It's not good for recycling. On the compostable side, you don't want little pieces of plastic in your soil. So when you're talking about oxo-degradable, if someone brings that up, it's another kind of a greenwash effect. It's a way of justifying plastic at the moment, but it's actually a little bit more of a dangerous way, in a sense. So it requires a lot of questioning about why that's positive. What you're hearing more about is compostable. So here's where you've got microbial digestion. So microbes, this is an aerobic process. What you're doing is you're trying to make soil. And basically that's the big thing. So in this particular process, what we're talking about is all the products have to be natural biosynthesis polymers in order for it to be compostable. So with biosynthesis, you're talking about plants, animals, and all that ugly stuff like bacteria and algae and fungi and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's where compostable comes from. And you're trying to completely decompose whatever you're working with. So from a demand standpoint, what the challenge is resin. You know, there's a PHA resin that everybody thinks would be fantastic in flexible packaging, but it is all going to clamshells for fast food, and that's a big place. But that's where all the resin's going today. So it's not going to see flexible packaging until we build more plants, but more plants are being built. So resin. People in your government. What I mean by this is the idea that government giving businesses incentive to add this capacity, to build it. We need to create an environment where we're recognizing that there's an economic opportunity and that we can be a leader in it. When it comes to packaging and food, domestic sources for materials are great to have because of the turnaround time, especially when you're talking about bioresins. Think about it. We're talking about stuff that doesn't have the shelf life of polyester. So we don't want it to have the shelf life of plastic. Well, we got to make it here. We got to shorten that cycle time. So there's a situation there that is an opportunity for us. And then I think composting. I think that the idea of building more composting facilities. We're not going to get to that backyard compost in a short period of time, but we could get to industrial composting and start to try to figure out how to get it there. Because like I said, the earlier presentations, it's not, the infrastructure doesn't exist. So how do you create it and how do you get people incentivized? From a compostable versus recyclable, kind of an interesting argument, right? Because the compost thing is a beautiful end game, because at the end of it, it becomes soil. The recycling thing, not such a great end game because it becomes a park bench. Today, the easier entry point is recycling, because we have some infrastructure in place. We know it pretty well from things we've been doing over these years. So the entry point is attractive, it's easier, it's lower cost. But from a compost standpoint, which is far more complex and a lot of this testing stuff, it does have the better end game. Every single manufacturer we deal with, and we deal with probably somewhere around 40, every one of them is working on this. That has never happened in the past. We had somebody invent something that was kind of neat and kind of this little niche thing. This is different. So I think that there's an opportunity here. What's going to change it is differentiation. So the work that's being done on the side, I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. It's going to allow companies to differentiate and start to make profit on stuff. Once that happens, that's when we're going to have a big difference. Now, the thing I worry about in this particular scenario is economics versus economy. As we bring this economics in line so that it can become more of a mass market, hopefully the economy doesn't go in the opposite direction, because that has always fought these trends in the past. And so if we do have a little bit of a slowdown, that can slow this process down. So there is, on the economic side, there is a little bit of that concern. Material innovation. The bio-based resins here's what's cool. You had all those resins I showed you in one of those slides that had PBS and PLA and PHA. They're all great. People are mixing them now. Today's world is not your mother's blow up the beaker lab world anymore. Okay, today's world is computers. We're able to go on the computer and do far more product development on chemicals than and chemistries before we ever do a test on a piece of material. And so we can get to places faster. So that computing capability is going to play a role in this particular space. It's already doing that. People are mixing resins and getting performance properties. So PLA, for instance, always known to be brittle, kind of noisy in a package. There's an example of the Sun Chips bag and how people talk about it being noisy, and whether there's a little myth in that or truth, doesn't matter. It is a noisy package. Now all of a sudden, take PLA, mix it with various versions of PBS that are being developed, and all of a sudden you have something that's not as noisy, has the performance, is biodegradable. So all of a sudden things are happening like that, and they're happening fast, and people are doing testing, and they're trying extrusions and laminations. So what I see is more bio-based resins coming out. You're going to see stuff that is lighter, thinner, and stronger. We're already seeing it every day. And new resins that are waste-based that'll help us move through. What you're seeing is process innovations. So not only lamination can work in this space because the adhesives are being developed, but you're also seeing some work with extrusion. And cleaner finishing. I told you about that E-beam. There's cleaner and faster finishing going on. So if that happens, now you're talking about being able to do smaller runs. You're talking about being able to access the smaller brands to this kind of bioresins. And then chem recycling and compost development, it's going to take a little time, but there is demand there and people are investing. From an economic and other reality standpoint, collaboration. So I told you, one of the big things on compost is this idea of the pasta testing and the kind of testing. How do you certify it? It's a little bit of a dark world at the moment, a little bit murky to try to navigate through. The manufacturers are getting together and they're aligning themselves because they see the governments taking action. So in Europe, strong action being taken saying everything's got to be recyclable by this date. Everything's got to be compostable by this date. Mergers and acquisitions, the money is flowing into this space. So you're going to see capacity going up. Not only that, but things like digital printing don't hold digital printing constant. What you're going to find is by this time next year, the presses are going to be running faster. And then this wave of customers that we see, it requires a wave of design around it, and that's why we're here, and a wave of development, and that's happening. Well, if I were you, I would narrow the vision. So the people that I've talked to that have been successful with this have focused on a single project to get used to getting the language, to talk to people about the different options that are available. They've gone and they've worked with people like Haney and collaborated with people that know and said, okay, I want to create this specific package. And so to not do anything, I don't recommend at this point. I recommend doing something. And to do something, focus it. And do something where you're going to get some experience working with the different materials. Secondly, the collaboration is the key. But don't, I try to, when you talk about economies of scale and stuff like that, here's the thing. If you work with everybody, you're going to get so many different mixed messages that you're not going to move forward. So it becomes a horizontal game, and this is a real horizontal trap in this one, because everybody's working on it, but everybody has these different levels of knowledge and commitment. So find the good partners that you can collaborate with that are really dedicated and invested in it. Obviously, doing something like this, right? We're here because somebody's invested in this type of scenario. That's the kind of partners you guys have to look for in your materials, in your processes. Because everybody is talking it, few people are living it and vertical. So again, try to get your collaboration where you're moving vertically. And then lastly, pick your sources. I don't mean material sources. What I mean is to stay up with what's going on. It's moving quickly. So pick the sources that you can get information from. Find good sources and stay with them, and make sure you're reading them and you're following them and you're learning. Okay, this is a great opportunity for our industry. It's a great opportunity from a design standpoint. It's a great opportunity from a material standpoint. It's not an easy one. It's a huge challenge, but that's why it's a great opportunity. We were just talking in here. Those of us who have been around packaging for a little bit or printing for a little bit, this is fun because we're doing something that's really meaningful and it's really cool and it's possible. But there's a lot of work to be done. You can see where we are today versus where we want to go. So pick your sources and make sure you stay with them. So those are my 3 things, and I'm done.
Good job.
So thank you for
Thanks to all the presenters today. For more information on the VIA Learning Series, visit haneypkg.com.